Over the next couple of weeks, we are going to do something. Now, something quite interesting, something very different, something that there's not a lot of stuff out there for us to borrow, which I think is good. I think we're in a season, really, if we're really honest, that after COVID, after pandemic, church, us, we are in a season of adaptation. So we're adapting things. And actually, I just think God is saying, I don't want you to enter a season of adaptation, I want you to enter a season of innovation. Because innovation's new. We don't want to adapt, we need to innovate. We need something fresh, something creative, not just to repackage this. So whatever this church is, whatever this Christian life is, whatever it is to follow Jesus, my impact over the last few years in the world has been negligible. Okay, and I think many of you can identify with that. There's something that isn't working. This, okay, is doing some good, but it's not fulfilling the mandate God's put on our life. Is that okay to say? Good. Happy day. So 2 weeks ago, we've had a long session on this. You've done really well preparing us for change for the Ekklesia. And so 2 weeks ago, we looked at ripping out our cultural conditioning, which was awesome. And the response was awesome of God's Spirit with us. And then last week, we looked at ripping out our Christian conditioning. That was fun. Really just going, oh dear gosh, we've inherited so much rubbish. And so today and next week, so this was quite a long one. It's taken a little while to put together. We're going to extend this for a number of different reasons. So we're going to unpack this kind of two parts to this one message. I figured rather than you be here for an hour and a half, you'd probably appreciate that. So you can get me a drink later, that's fine. And to start this process off, I need to do something a little weird. I want to take us through the entire, within reason, history of our faith very quickly. Okay? So you're going to bear with me. I'm going to miss some things out, okay? There's certain things that we're not going to look at, but there are certain things that I think if we look at this, we are going to go somewhere interesting today, because church isn't necessarily what we thought it was. And so today is one of the first times we're actually going to start unpacking this in terms of challenging ourselves about what this is. Is that all right? Good. Happy days. It's also good to have some of the family back with us, isn't it? So that's cool. So the two initial events of human history, our history in the faith, that I want to quickly go through is, firstly, the flood. That was quite a big event. We've looked at this a little bit over the last couple of weeks, and also I want to look at the Tower of Babel. Now, if you were here for the Supernatural Realm series, you will understand a lot of the background information. If you weren't, I do recommend you go back and look at that stuff, because it does open our eyes to a lot of the background stuff that I think will be helpful. Ultimately, God isn't destroying humanity, God is saving humanity. His goal is always to do that. But let's get cracking on. Of the flood, which is fascinating, he says this, Genesis 6:11 to 13. The world was corrupt before God, and the land was filled with violence. God saw the world and saw it was corrupted. All the flesh had perverted its way on the earth. Notice from the Supernatural Realm series, if you understand that. If you're not sure what I'm on about, just quickly ignore me and read Genesis 6:1 to 4, and you'll see this is a bonkers world. But here the flesh of mankind, the bloodline of humanity, has been mixed with the supernatural race. It's all a bit weird. But essentially, the point I want to get across about this is here we have a world which is individualism. It's individualistic by nature. I want to go as far to say that it's a Darwinistic society. That is, you've got a group of people, you've got families, you've got packs, you've got individuals who essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to compete for the same resources. Okay, so it's the strongest wins out. It's kind of a fight to the death, literally. That's why it's so violent, because there's no organization, there's no leadership, there's no culture. It's like when churches try to have no leadership in a room. The idea is beautiful, but the loudest person in the room is in charge, whether they're anointed or not, okay? It's just, we've all been in meetings like that, and it's interesting to say the least. And although our Western world would like to tell you, probably Westminster would like to believe that we are a meritocracy, which is a posh word just to say this, that anybody can achieve to be anything as long as you're gifted or talented enough. I don't think we are. I think largely the success, if you look at statistically, you work out how people get to where they get to, by and large, it's a generational handover. Okay, so you are born in the right place, with the right situation, right opportunities. You have more opportunity for success than somebody else. So although we are moving towards maybe a more meritocratic society, we're still quite Darwinistic. It still is, dependent on circumstances, we are still trying to fight. It's still a very, as we saw over the last couple of weeks, a very individual society. So in a way, I don't think we're much different than this society to a degree. And so the flood tells us this. The flood tells us that when it comes to individualism, it doesn't work. We saw that last week, but again here we see that with no system, no designated leadership, it leads to some form of anarchy. Low-level anarchy, high-level anarchy, anarchy is still anarchy. Okay? That's the first thing. Then, when it comes to the Tower of Babel, we see this in Genesis 11, verses, I think it's 1 to 4. It says, "Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, 'Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly.'" That's a supernatural revelation in this moment. We just take it for granted. They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be scattered over the face of the whole earth." So here, there is a couple of supernatural revelations which are fascinating. The first one is they've created and understood in the spiritual realm. Someone has given them information that actually there's a better way to build. This is fascinating. And secondly, they also have the revelation, the understanding that God's plan is to go out into the world, to make the rest of the world like Eden. So they're like, otherwise, if we don't do this, this is what's going to happen, guys. So we've got to do something. Essentially, this is based around a character, if you want to watch the Supernatural series, I recommend it, called Nimrod. Nimrod is a demigod. There you go. I said it. I've just not just been watching stuff on Stranger Things. This is really reality. And essentially what he's done, this offspring of the sons of God and a mixture with humanity, is he's taken over the Assyrian race. He's conquered the known world. And by conquering the known world, he's put across his culture and his language, so that everyone's kind of the same. They're dominated, okay? So everything that they understand, this is what is going on. And he decides that he's going to utilize humanity and influence them and enslave them to kind of build an anti-Eden rebellion to try and ascend into the heavens again and really try and take Yahweh's place. Something that we know couldn't possibly happen, but nonetheless, certain things try. You with me? Well done. We'll leave the weirdness in just there. So God isn't destroying the human race. He's not being cruel or controlling. He's saving humanity. And in short, from those two accounts, we can see this. We can see that too much freedom for humanity or too much control leads to the same result: corruption and violence. Individual-led society leads to anarchy. Collective-led society leads to tyranny. They don't work. Fascinating. Ultimately, by and large, the reason for that is Jeremiah 17:9, which says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure." In other words, when we haven't had Jesus come and restore our heart, we are deceitful. We are deceived, but we are also deceitful. So then we're going to move quickly ahead to the next stage of our history. We're going to enter the period of Israel, individualism, overseen by the judges. And you'll see this is a really interesting situation. They enter this continuous cycle of life. They disobey God. Then they experience a warning. Maybe a judge comes, prophet comes on occasion. But they don't heed to the warning, so they suffer oppression by other gods. They cry out for help. God sends a rescuer, a judge, maybe a prophet in different times, and Israel is freed. Then they disobey again, and the whole thing starts over and over again, continuously. We have the period of the judges. We have the period of the kings. We have the period of the prophets. And ultimately, individualism, collectivism, doesn't matter what seems to take place, the end result is always the same. The people of God never really become the people of God as God originally intended. It's not working. These governmental structures aren't working. This leadership system, although the kings had beautiful successes at times, most of them did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So something, somewhere, needs to change. And so roughly, and the maths is terrible whoever you look at, roughly 4,000-ish years, give or take thousands of years, after the Tower of Babel, in comes this really interesting guy. You might know him, Jesus. It's quite cool. It's quite cool. Read the book of Mark if you haven't. It's good. And so Jesus comes, and here's the humanity that we can't be for ourselves. He shows us what it is to be truly human. He comes, he gives us a new heart. Beautiful. He comes, he dies on the cross to restore our soul, and he defeats death so we can have eternal life that starts right here, right now, and have perfect relationship with Father God. So the death's beautiful, actually. Not just sad, it's beautiful. And the resurrection is just sheer gold. And so at that point, he gives us a new heart. He's basically come and he says there is a new way to be human. And that is by having my Spirit live within you. So he comes and he says a number of things. Luke 22:20, he says, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. It's not old covenant. It's not old covenant adapted. It's new covenant. Something never before seen. Mark 1:14-15, he says, the time has come. The kingdom of God has come. Change your thinking and believe the good news. If you have a faith that is not good news, if you follow a Jesus who is not good news, you are barking up the wrong tree. It's good news. And then he says things like in Matthew 10:7-8, he says, as you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick. Raise the dead. Cleanse those who have leprosy. Drive out demons. Freely you have received. Freely give. You can't earn this stuff. And that's interesting for those of us, I think most of us, we want to see more stuff. We want to see the stuff. John Wimber was funny. He said, when I served the devil, I got to do the devil's stuff. Now I'm serving Jesus. I want to do the stuff Jesus did. I want to see the Jesus stuff. It should be better. And he ultimately did in many, many ways. But it's free. You can't earn it. You can't fast it in. We'll talk about that. But you can't. And so ultimately, the mandate hasn't changed. From Adam and Eve to Noah to Abraham to Moses to even David through to us, the mandate remains. Make this world like his world. So that anything that happens in heaven should happen here, and anything that doesn't happen in heaven shouldn't happen here. There is this progress, this sanctification, this renewal of all things that we get to play a part in. That's why constantly, and we saw this over the last couple of weeks, he says, be fruitful and multiply, rule the earth and subdue it, because it's about his dominion, it's about the kingdom, it's about the king's domain. That's what the kingdom is, the king's domain. And so it's beautiful. And so it's not individualism now that's going to work. It's not collectivism that's going to work. It's not judges that's going to work. It's not the prophets that's going to work. It's not the kings, anointed as they were in many ways, that are going to make this work. It's the king who is going to make this work. And he comes up with this new plan that is kind of new, but kind of not. And so he says a number of things. He says this. Matthew 16:18. He says, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Okay, so whatever this church is, it's quite important. It is going to be the vehicle for bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth right here, right now. But 4 weeks ago, I talked to you about the power of unlearning. I'm sure you will remember it word for word. We need to put that into practice now. Because when we started to unpack and rip out, the dead poets thing, we ripped out cultural conditioning, we ripped out our Christian conditioning, now we need to rip out our church conditioning. Because church that we've inherited is not church as Jesus intended. And the term that Jesus uses for church here is translated to us as the word Ekklesia. It's our big word. It's our series word. You can see it there. We've been talking about it for ages. Some of you thought we were going to spend a year in Ecclesiastes, which is a book in the Old Testament. I apologize for that lack of clarity. I'm surprised you're still here. But no, Ekklesia is this term for church. Interestingly, the term church is very different than we use today. It's a German word, 16th century origin. It's Kirche, and it essentially does mean a building for religious Christian purposes. That isn't what this is. This is very different. Now, there's different ideas on this, but ultimately, roughly, it's used 114 times in the New Testament. It's also referred to dozens and dozens and dozens of times in different types of metaphor. And we're going to explore a number of them that we believe are important. And the literal and common thought of Ekklesia comes because essentially Ekklesia is a combination of two words. It's quite common in our English language that would take place, and certainly in theirs. So we get, have I even talked about that? Let me just skip ahead. No, I haven't. So ek means out, and kaleo means called. So essentially it means to be called out. Ekklesia, that's what it is. And so the literal and common understanding is that it's to be called out. Church is to be called out. Now, if I'm really honest, having read a lot about this, as I'm sure some of you have over the years, but in particular the last several months, I think we kind of make this whatever we feel we need it to be at the time. I think we change it to depend on what mood we're in. So there's a number of ways I think we interpret Ekklesia depending on how we're feeling at the time. And that is, we're called out from the world to be special and keep ourselves safe. We saw a bit of that last week. We'll look at that again next week. Or we're called out of the established church into the world to do the stuff. I would argue, as of course you know, that whole kind of spiel around being called out misses the main intention of what Jesus is trying to tell us by using this common word for the time. So, as I said, this is different, okay? So feel free to disagree with us. That's okay. Don't disunite over it, but I'm going to present a slightly different understanding of what this is. And if we're right about this, and I believe that we probably are, it changes everything. Changes how we think, how we function, and more importantly, changes the impact that we can have. The clues to this Ekklesia are found in two ways that Jesus understood them when he used them. Firstly, we need to understand that we can't make anything mean today what it wasn't intended to mean when it was used. So Jesus using this term Ekklesia, we can't, right, so in the English it's translated and it means this. No, we need to understand, okay, what did Jesus mean by this word? Because if we can understand that, then we can have a better understanding of it now. And so firstly, he understood this term as a Jew. This is quite interesting. So Ekklesia was actually translated from the Hebrew. And the Hebrew word for this, Ekklesia, essentially is kahal. It's used in the Old Testament roughly 123 times in 116 different verses. And it means a number of different things. It's used to describe absolutely God and his people, God's people, and also it is used to describe the gathering of God's people. So common things, nothing there that's particularly groundbreaking. But then something interesting happens. A number of Old Testament verses where this is used or this is insinuated, and I see this more in the New Testament than anywhere else. It's used to describe something called a judicial body. A judicial body. And the judicial body, the Kahal, was called out from the community to be almost this governing system, this ruling system. And so a number of things that they are involved in. So they oversaw various social affairs. They start implementing justice. Sounds a bit scary, sounds like a police force, doesn't it? It's slightly different to that. And fascinating, which we'll come to in a minute, strategy of war. It's interesting for a community of faith, whatever that is, isn't it? Interesting. You'll notice Moses is trying to be the judge for all the people, and Jethro, his father-in-law, he comes and says, look, there's a better way, we need to separate this out. You need someone in charge of 10, someone in charge of 50, someone in charge of 100, because you can't do all this, but all the really, really, really important cases will go to you. And so there's something going on here about this judicial body. So this governmental group, whatever it is to help and support and grow and develop and rule and govern the wider community. I was looking into this, I was thinking, well, if this is true, then there's got to be, and this was a brilliant moment for me anyway, there's got to be something that still is around in society concerning this. And there is, or there certainly was. In the 16th century, there were various Jewish communities, particularly in the south of the Polish and Lithuanian Commonwealth, where they implemented just this, to kind of sort out they called it the Kahal. They tried to sort out various problems in their society, and they needed help in terms of how they were going to govern stuff, and they called it this, Kahal. So, firstly, he used this term as a Jew. But secondly, he also used this word as part of Greco-Roman culture. So very much this term, Ekklesia, is not so much a religious term, it is a political term. And this is going to be important for us. And what is fascinating about this particular term, according to Greco-Roman culture, is it is commonly used to describe a governance council. How interesting. Potentially, although there's loads of different aspects to this, and we're going to be here forever if we really unpacked it, but the Athenian council, so in Athens, in Greece, it was the council, it was the representative group of the wider community. Interesting fact, everyone was kind of able to be involved in that, apart from the lowest class, which is a bit harsh, but there we go. Talk about tyranny, bringing that in. And so this Greek assembly of citizens, essentially what happens is they are responsible for the general affairs, the war strategy, and electing officials. It's carrying over this term. Fascinating. And so what does all that mean? Why have I brought that to attention? Well, because although the mandate's the same, be fruitful and multiply, bring heaven to earth, could argue raise a family to bring heaven to earth. You've all heard that somewhere before, hopefully. It's our vision statement, that's not changing. But the vehicle, so the vision's the same, but the vehicle now has changed. The governance structure has changed. The way this is going to come about is not about the individuals, it's about not just about the collectives in terms of absolute monarchy, it is going to be something vibrant, something different, with the King of Kings being the king. Different. So I've been umming about this quite a lot over the last several months. And for me, Jesus isn't just saying there's a new way to be human. He's initiating church, which isn't a brand new idea, but it's a renovated idea taking from this system. And he's saying, yeah, there's a new way to lead. There's a new way to govern. There's a new way to impact society. There's a new way to transform culture. There's a new way to bring heaven to earth, and it's through my Ekklesia, which he will build. That's, again, massively important. He's looking for a people, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, who will take responsibility. Not play it safe. We looked at Noah. I don't know if you were all here, but we looked at Noah and we saw that even though he was righteous and even though he was blameless, even though he took moral responsibility unlike Cain, even though he took personal responsibility unlike Adam and Eve, he failed to take collective responsibility. Because everyone else around him perished. When it comes to Abraham, when it comes to Moses, and God says, I'm going to do this, I'm going to destroy this, they say, hey God, you're the God of justice. Will the God of justice really do this? Noah, nothing. Yes, sir, whatever you say, sir, get on with it, sir. There's no collective responsibility. So that's why we did that before we did this. And so whatever this responsibility is, there's something about governance, there's something about rulership, there's something about taking dominion and subduing the earth. I'm going somewhere very different than you potentially think I am right now, and that's great. But it's interesting. So we're meant to implement justice, we're meant to implement peace, we're meant to bring governance, and we're also meant to be involved in war strategy. That last one's weird, isn't it? But notice this. This is what really got me, because I was like, war strategy. War strategy. Listen to the context of where he uses the word church, ekklesia, initially. Matthew 16:18. If it's here again, let's go find it. I will build my church and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. For me, that only really makes sense now if we understand that Ekklesia is this governing ruling body that actually is responsible for some kind of war strategy. Jesus is saying when the Ekklesia advances, which is the whole point, by the way, that it grows, it impacts and transforms society, it transforms our world, that when it does that, even the gates of Hades will not prevent it. Now, the gates aren't an attacking force. I don't know if you've ever watched Lord of the Rings or any war. If you've got the walls or the gates, they are defense mechanisms. So it's saying even the defenses of the enemy will not be able to prevent the advancements of his kingdom through the body of church. That is what he's talking about. So it is about war. It is about warfare in many, many different ways. And this is where I get really excited. And I'm not ready to do anything with this just yet. But you will remember that when we looked at our Supernatural World series and we unpacked all the spiritual beings and we showed the hierarchy of the heavens and we looked at the hierarchy of the demonic. Some of you will remember that vaguely, right? And we saw the different things. And I suggested to us that God has a council in heaven who he convenes. A ruling governance council who he discusses with. And you see this throughout the scripture where he holds counsel with the sons of God. Just Google it, look it up, you'll find it. And so he's talking with them. He's asking their opinions. What shall we do? And I wonder that actually what God's trying to initiate here is he's saying my ecclesia is going to operate in exactly the same way on the earth as my ecclesia, my governance system, the way I run things in the heavens. And so I want to partner with you to be my governance system on the earth, just like a partner with the council in the heavens. Which means that actually we are called to partner with non-rebellious spiritual beings. So actually we should have some kind of partnership with angelic beings. For some of you, that's like, what is he doing now? Like, I was liking it until he said that. You can't read the Bible without being aware of the supernatural realm. It's got ghosts in it. It's got giants in it. You've got rebellious sons of God mating with human women in it. You can't deny it. It's there, okay? We don't like to talk about it. The Bible is on another world because it's explaining something that is more than the chair you're sitting on. It's more than this simple material world. There's something going on here that Jesus is trying to get across to us about Ekklesia and its governance and its rulership and its partnering with him to establish his kingdom, his domain, and it's going to be through people like you and people like the people next to you who have been given some kind of authority that I don't believe we've ever truly stepped into because we've never really understood what we're meant to do. We're waiting for Jesus to come back. It's just easier, right? Well, I know there's problems in the world, but one day Jesus is going to come back and it's all going to be good. He's going to make everything new. No, his plan is to use you to make that come about. He's not going to just turn up and go, oh yeah, I'm the man. No, his goal is to partner with each one of us to bring about the gradual productivity of his kingdom right here, right now, in your families, in your town, this town, in your worlds, in your workplace, where you volunteer, to expect the kingdom because he's given us authority.